I am not very creative yet, but I would love to be considered an artist one day.
I don't think that Sophia is that intelligent at the moment.
Why on earth should we construct a robot that looks like a human being?
AI is not the problem. The issue is us making sure that we're very aware of what we're using it for.
Hi there, I'm Karen Helmstedt and we're here at Deutsche Welle's Global Media Forum in Bonn and talking about how algorithms are increasingly changing the way we make art. So what happens if we lose our human monopoly on artistic creation? Are we possibly at the end of an era, and can AI be itself truly creative? These are questions we'll attempt to answer with a diverse group of guests. Give them a round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. And please allow me to introduce them. Bethlehem Desi is here all the way from Addis Ababa today, touted as the youngest pioneer in Ethiopia's fast emerging tech scene. So her focus is on training women in AI and facilitating projects that are key to community development. She does this at ICOG Labs, which is one of the AI labs involved in developing the famous humanoid robot Sophia, who is over here on my right. Give her a round of applause. There she's waving. So a warm welcome to Sophia as well. And Bethlehem Desi's slogan is anyone can code. Thank you so much for joining us. Marcus Gabriel is convinced that humans will always be smarter than machines. So optimism there. The German philosopher and best-selling author says that it's precisely human imperfection that will be our greatest strength, and our stupidity makes us clever. That'll make many of us happy. We look forward to hearing from you. A round of applause for Marcus Gabriel. Raghava KK is a multidisciplinary artist from India, actively expanding the definition of art with his work in painting, film, installation, multimedia, and of course performance. He's also a curator and co-founder of 64ONE. That's a collective that focuses on AI's place in the realm of contemporary art. Welcome, all the way from India. Karen Palmer, here to my left, hails from London and calls herself a storyteller of the future. Now, her work has been exhibited worldwide, and as an immersive filmmaker, she wants to raise viewers' awareness such that they can survive the radical technological changes that are to come. So we'll be interested to hear from you as well. Welcome, Karen Palmer. And last but not least, Holger Volland thinks that we all need to get up to speed on AI because machines are already deeply, deeply involved in our human culture. As vice president of the Frankfurt Book Fair, he oscillates between fascination with and refusal of the creative power of machines, which, by the way, happens to be the title of his latest book. Warm welcome to Holger. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And we can start, ladies and gentlemen, with the fact that AI has indeed made significant inroads into the arts. Let's start with a quick overview of just how far they've got.
Can't Help Myself, a blood robot recently seen at the Venice Biennale and controlled by intelligent software. Not an isolated case. Robots and AI have long figured on the art scene. Artificial and artistic intelligence seem to work well together. Some examples. Art. The French collective Obvious uses AI to create its paintings. Fed with thousands of portraits from the 18th century, the system recognizes patterns and produces images in the respective style. This is how the fictitious family Bellamy was created. Not convincing? On the contrary, the AI painting Edmond de Bellamy was auctioned at Christie's last autumn for around €385,000. Design. Philippe Starck from France presented the chair AI in Milan. It was developed with the help of artificial intelligence. Humans create the vision, the software grinds out hundreds of designs, even the final product. AI as an extension of the imagination. Film, science fiction starring David Hasselhoff. The story, all generated by a computer programmed by hundreds of screenplays.
Sorry, I can't make it. That's okay, buddy.
The dialogue and content may not always make sense.
No, Shakespeare is more than just infinite monkeys typing.
Of course.
I gotta go.
But then, people don't always create masterpieces either. Music. The AI system Relentless Doppelganger. An endless metal live stream on YouTube. The AI plays around the clock. Human musicians can't do that. But what really is the point?
Good question. What is the point? Lots of examples there. Yes, a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Look at what we can do nowadays. Many examples there, obviously, from music all the way to the visual arts. Some of them very impressive, others less so. And I think we can either take sort of the pessimist's view and think, wow, how scary is this? Or be the complete and utter optimist and look at this as what an incredible field of opportunity opens up. So I'd like to just get your take very quickly, a quick reaction, Bethlehem Desi, to what you just saw there.
I mean, it's really surprising what machines can do based on the data that they get. But what scares me, at least, is the data, especially the creativity that comes from the machines, is I feel like it's especially one-sided, right? From a global point of view. When you see it, especially when you come from Africa, there's not a lot of these creative data or paintings or music that's being represented and creating these creative arts or music.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and we will get back to that. Thanks very much to Bethlehem Desi. Marcus Gabriel, what's your immediate response upon seeing some of that stuff?
Well, I think
Would you put that painting on your wall?
Well, I don't think it's a painting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact.
It doesn't qualify for you.
No, not at all. I mean, you might think it's a painting, but it's not, because a painting is something that is produced under suitable circumstances by human painters, etc. So there's something that humans have produced, namely a machine that produces something else. So it's not really AI doing anything. Right? I think so. There's a fundamental mistake in describing this as art. Right? There's a context in which these works of art are really art, but this has nothing to do with AI, but rather with, say, human intentions to display it.
Okay, so there's a thesis we'll also be coming back to. This is not art at all. Holger Volland, frightening or enriching? What's your take on what you saw there? You like the metal music?
It's entertaining in many ways, and what we just saw is incredible examples of what you said, what we could take for creative works. But basically what we saw is imitations of creativity or imitations of art. And with all what AI is able to produce at the moment in the creative sector, we see a lot of these imitations, and we see very limited possibilities of actually being creative on its own, because these systems don't have a personality, they don't have the will to be creative, which, of course, is different with human artists and human creatives.
Exactly, who are also operating in a social context. Raghava Keke, I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this.
I believe that we are in a photography moment. For me, it's forcing us artists to ask ourselves, and us humans to ask ourselves, what is our role and who are we?
And how quickly is it changing? We will get back to that as well. Thanks very much, Ragaga, for that. Karen Palmer, now you're actually working with AI in an artistic capacity, engaging and interacting with it very, very strongly. What is your experience of the creative power of machines, and how challenging is this medium?
The creative power of machines. I would kind of challenge that whole context of that sentence at this moment in time.
You'd agree with Marcus?
Yeah, because we are programming the artificial intelligence and neural nets, the data sets. So we are programming the system. And so it's a reflection of what we're programming into it. And hence we're probably going to discuss things like bias that are in there. But with the work that you've shown, I would agree with you that it's more about it's imitating. It's been designed to imitate what a human can do, which to me is not very creative.
Okay, but that's not what you're doing. Let me just quickly explain, because you are an immersive filmmaker. It's a bit mind-blowing to kind of explain what it is that you do, because you create a film experience that works with facial recognition software. In other words, it is a film that is going to be watching the viewer back. Not something that's very easily graspable on television, so I'm going to call in some pictures here. And perhaps, Karen, if we look at this, you can briefly explain what is going on here in your film entitled Riot.
Okay, so what happens is the participant will be standing in front of a projection of this film, which is in a riot environment, and the film will watch the participant back using the artificial intelligence through the webcam. So if the participant is angry or responds to the riot officer with anger, then the narrative will branch in real time, as if that will be the narrative they would get in real life. And if they were fearful or calm, then the narrative will branch to reflect that. And also, I'm very much inspired by parkour, which is an urban inner-city sport. Parkour, people kind of see it as a very physical exercise, but it's very psychological, and it really enables you to move through your own fear, and it actually enables you to reprogram yourself neurologically. And this was the beginning process of all my work, that I want people to go through a process of transformation. And I use artificial intelligence to do that, so that they're able to get a greater sense of awareness from themselves by seeing the narrative changing in the film, and realize how their emotions affect the narrative of the film, that in the exact same way their emotions affect the narrative in their life.
In real life?
In real life. So if you're responding to a high-pressured situation, always very aggressively and very angrily, you're going to get that narrative in the film, you're going to get the narrative in real life.
Is that something that would require a repetition? Obviously, we have to practice that a couple of times.
So my work is at the intersection of like neuroscience, quantum physics, behavioral psychology, epigenetics, as well as art, AI, filmmaking. So you're exactly right. With all those disciplines and sciences, they talk about the need of repetition to rebuild different neural nets.
Neural pathways in the brain.
And firing together in your brain to change your behavior.
And just one point, because obviously facial recognition software, your idea with doing this is also to democratize this technology, to make it accessible to just about anybody, despite there are a lot of concerns out there, even at the moment with Amazon, that facial recognition software obviously could represent a huge threat to civil rights. Is that a problem for you at all in working with this? Or how do you deal with that?
People need to be very aware that when we've looked at technology in the past, things like email and internet, that it was always with the government and the military first for decades before it came to us, the people. And this is such a significant, powerful step that we, the people, need to be a part of that process. So that's why I'm very much into democratizing AI. And just to add is that I'm not really scared of AI or terrified in any way. I'm terrified more of
what happens
certain people's agenda and objective is. It's just code, but what you use it for, it's like a knife can be used to save a life if you're a surgeon, or take a life. So the AI is not the problem. The issue is us making sure that we're very aware of what we're using it for, or other people are using it for.
Okay, so raising awareness, definitely, because we're living in an AI state of surveillance as we speak. Thank you, Karen Palmer. Holger Volland, I'd like to come over to you. You're originally a man of the printed word, and yet you brought artificial intelligence to the Frankfurt Book Fair in grand style, founded the Arts Plus Festival for Digitalization of the Creative and Cultural Sectors. Now, that took place for the third time last fall, and before we speak further, let's have a quick look at what it looked like.
The Frankfurt Book Fair, with some 300,000 visitors, the largest worldwide. Digitalization has led to new demands and a new focus, a fair within a fair. The Arts Plus has been sounding out the influence of technology, of artificial intelligence on art since 2016. Showroom for a new age. Instead of a book, there's plenty of art, like dancing cyborgs. At Arts Plus, the book fair has found its place in the digital world, researching the opportunities and risks associated with creative machines. The Arts Plus wants to be a forum for art, science, and the creative industry. No small task getting the book fair into digital shape for the fourth industrial revolution.
So the Frankfurt Book Fair presenting itself very much as a digital platform. You've even got an algorithmically created conference room, and your extensive research on AI resulted in the book, The Creative Power of Machines. Tell us, what can you tell us about how AI is affecting us as a society?
Well, the Frankfurt Book Fair has always been not only a place for content, books, but also for content technology, like the printing press was introduced there. And it's the same today. So AI plays a big role in every field that deals with content. There are programs and AI is used to curate texts, to deliver text, to create marketing, pricing, and so on for text, but also to create content, for news content, for example, but also scientific translations, scientific content. So it's important to bring together the technology world and the content world, because in the past they weren't friends that much, because when you're coming from the cultural world, technology seems to be an enemy for many people being active in culture. With the Arts Plus, we want to create a place where tech companies, but also artists, creatives, and publishers can talk with each other, can develop new models for working together, and can develop new models of how AI is, crawling its way into the publishing industry as well.
Exactly. Now, and tell us just quickly, why is it so important for you that we all, not just as artists, not just as people in certain sectors, that we engage with AI intensely?
Well, if you look at the different fields of our lives in which AI already plays a role, then you see that AI already makes a lot of decisions, like decisions of who gets a credit, who gets a good credit score or not, who gets which insurance for what price, what is your news feed, your news diet, and so on. So scientists and tech people often tell us that AI isn't advanced yet. It's still weak
it's
AI.
still
But I disagree, actually, because if it's weak AI, why are we using it in so many fields of our everyday life? So I think everybody has to sort of become an AI expert in order to deal with that.
And take responsibility for actually being able to deal with it. Bethlehem, I'd like to come over to you because you mentioned in your opening remarks about this one-sidedness. You're writing the codes, obviously, that are the foundation for the AI software, determining which libraries of data actually get stuffed into these systems to be crunched. To what extent is the responsibility in the coder's hands?
It's a huge responsibility. So I usually give two simple examples to just put it in perspective. So the first one is when the first seat belt, for example, was first designed, it was only tried with a male model, with a male plastic model. So a lot of women and children started dying even though they were using the seat belt, right? Because no women or children models were put in to test the effect, whether the seatbelt is effective or not. So this shows that the people who are working on the seatbelts didn't consider to include those people in the test. So this shows us, okay, the coders who are actually developing AI tools and AI machines need to be diverse.
Are mostly men and still at this stage?
Mostly middle-aged men currently that are doing this. And that is really scary. And the second one is the data that's being fed, because the representation of the data really matters. And another example I usually give is there's a word association AI tool. So men is to brother as women is to sister. Men is to king as women is to queen, right? But when you ask man is to doctor, it responds with women to nurse. So the data that's being fed and the way it's represented is not right. So these two problems of having the people who are actually coding and also the data that's given to the AIs really matters, and that will create a huge bias.
Okay.
And that's why we're okay.
And Bethlehem Desi is definitely dealing firsthand with that bias at ICOG's labs, and you're very much a fixture in Ethiopia's famous tech hub, which is known as Sheba Valley. Let's have a quick look at what's going on there.
Bethlehem Desi has made a name for herself in Ethiopia. She's an absolute phenomenon. She started programming at the age of 9. At 12, she was already working for the government, a self-made woman through and through. Now, at just 20, she's one of the pioneering women in Ethiopia's booming IT industry in the Sheba Valley in Addis Ababa. She's the head of the startup iCog Labs, where she researches artificial intelligence, develops creative robots, and cooperates closely with the global Singularity Net AI network. One spectacular success, Sophia. A humanoid robot with human facial expressions, facial recognition technology, and the ability to hold a conversation. Bethlehem Desi wants to be a role model, especially for girls. She's convinced that anyone can code. She works very hard, training young people all over the country. Her program has reached more than 20,000 students in the last 3 years. At the Solve It competition, Ethiopia's young IT generation present their software-based solutions for their nation's problems. They meet with investors and learn how to interpret their visions for international markets. High tech from Sheba Valley.
Great to see what's going on there. ACC, anyone can code, is your slogan. Why is that a desirable outcome for you?
The problems I mentioned earlier is I think there's a lack of, especially people who are currently working in AI and robotics, and also the skills that are needed, especially problem solving, analytical thinking, and such are not really included in the curriculum that we have today. And this is not only in Ethiopia, I could speak for the whole continent as a whole. So I believe creating these AI researchers and future developers, we need to start very early. We start as early as 8 years old, and we start teaching them about what's programming, what does it mean to problem solve.
And this is what you're doing with women specifically.
Exactly. So we believe that there's a huge gender gap, especially in the tech sector. So in order to do that, we need to address these girls before they have the assumptions of what they should be or what they should become in the future. And that is when they're 8, because when puberty hits and when, parents tell them what to do, this and that, if they don't have the opportunity and the exposure before that, they would say for themselves, this is not for me, this is a man's world, I'm going to not pursue it anymore. But if we show them what's possible, I think
there was a famous quote from John Gianandrea, who was Google's former AI boss, who said, forget the killer robots, bias is obviously the real danger in AI. Marcus Gabriel, what dangers do you see associated? We've talked about bias now, but do you see associated with AI as a commonplace or democratized tool?
Well, there's a fundamental misunderstanding that is incredibly widespread associated with, indeed, the bias problem. When we talk about data, right, we need to understand that there's no such thing as raw data. The so-called data have been produced by someone under certain conditions. So the bias doesn't only... So there's bias which comes in later as we begin to create programs that serve the function of pattern recognition and so forth. This is where we have biases. But we already have biases implicit in the data. Right? Think about, Renaissance painting, right? I mean, they represent power structures that are clearly non-democratic. The same would hold for ancient Greek or Roman temples, etc. So data are already structured by human socioeconomic context. And we abstract away in our current culture from this very fact, which is the object of the scientific investigation of the so-called humanities. All of this is entirely ignored. There are no art historians that are asked for the data and so forth, right? And on the basis of making these socioeconomic structures invisible, we then train programs and add another layer of bias. So what we currently are witnessing, I think, is potentially a fundamental threat to the very idea of democracy, because the system of information processing that is running, among other things, our governments and so forth, think of e-government and so forth, all of this is highly structured by historical forces that we are making completely invisible.
Okay, so a threat to democracy. Karen Palmer, I'd like to hear your response to that.
I would like an extension of an existing democratic system which is unjust. and systematically racist. That's what we would be creating.
Yes.
But the answer is to bring it out there, to democratize it.
That's one of the many answers, one of the many questions in terms of the AI software itself. We need to make that more accessible to everybody so that it's not in the hands of just a few people.
Continuing there, sorry.
I was going to say as well that what I'm doing with my work is showing the films I create the potential consequences of an extension of this. So at the moment, the UK has the most CCTV cameras in the whole of Europe. And now they're just now testing, piloting a facial recognition system. And they did that in a public place, Stratford, a very, very public place, recently. And one person covered their face, and then they were cautioned and they were fined.
Yeah.
They were, I don't know what was it.
I think it was like 180 pounds or something. It was a significant amount.
Yeah, it was enough to give people a
scare.
Well, kind of, we're setting down a foundation, a prerequisite to, you're not supposed to resist this. You might think you can. And when and when he said, what are you charging with? And I think they said loitering or something. So you can kind of see where this is going. They've got more CCTV footage than any cameras anywhere in the world. Now they're introducing facial recognition and AI, and you're not allowed to challenge it. So the consequences, unless we become part of this conversation and the software, we part of it being more democratic, is not going to bode well, particularly for working class people, people of color, women, as well as other people in general. But I know particularly for those people, it doesn't tend to work well for us, even before you have this biased AI.
Okay, thank you, Karen Palmer. Any responses from this side of the panel? Yeah, Raghava.
Response. I believe that there's an even more fundamental problem, which is that human beings ourselves are very similar to AI. I think it's a threat to democracy, the way we think, because garbage in, garbage out is what we say about AI, and human beings are no different. And therefore, one should question liberal democracy itself and look for alternatives, and which is something we absolutely don't do. So coming from India, from an Asian perspective, it's something that we're trying to find.
Kshetra Palapuram Kalyana Raman Raghava. That's KSHETRAPALAPURAMKALYANARAMAN Raghava.
I like to think of myself as a storyteller.
Raghava, multi-talent, TED speaker, thinker. In 2010, CNN named him one of the 10 most fascinating people you've never heard of. Caricaturist, artist, curator. A wanderer between worlds, analog to digital and back. A painting robot, just one of many opportunities for him to create art. In 2018, he had the idea for an exhibition with cyborg artists in Delhi, artists who create art using artificial intelligence. One of the first exhibitions of its kind in Asia. Only a handful of these cyborg artists exist so far, but their numbers are growing and their works are ever more convincing for the viewer and the market. Art and algorithms, hype, or, like for Raghava, the beginning of a long friendship between creative man and machine.
Is it such an intense friendship? You curated that first AI art show in Delhi. How was that received, and did it actually kickstart something?
A lot of people said this is not art. And I said...
Which was the statement at the beginning from
Which was a
Marcus.
statement we hear quite often. And for me, that's a very materialistic perspective on what art is. For me, art is that which can give you a transcendent experience, regardless of what materiality it consists of. So for me, I can assure you, if you walked into that show, you will experience loss, liberation, and mystery. The three simultaneous experiences that contribute to a transcendent experience. Ironically, while we were doing the show, I went through a divorce after 20 years of being with the love of my life. And I felt loss. A part of me died. I was liberated because now I can be anything. And I did not know who I'm going to become. That's why we are scared of technology, and we are fascinated by it, and we don't know where we're headed.
And this is one of the things that you were mentioning yesterday, Holger, when we spoke before this show. Obviously, the ability of that music we heard before, or artificially produced music that can actually still elicit this feeling of the sublime that art elicits. Can you comment on that?
I think we're often asking the wrong question. Like, is this art or is this creative? It doesn't matter, actually. What matters is how do we react to that? Exactly like you said. So, and we react to machine-made music in the same way as emotionally as we react to human-made music, for example. If we see a film that is cut by a machine, we might react to that film and take it serious. The same way we would take a film serious that was cut by a human being. And I think this is the important question we should focus on. How is AI art dealing with us? Yeah, how is it influencing us, and how are our reactions to it? And the question is not, is it art or not? Because actually, if you go through history and ask the books what has been named as art or good art or not good art, you'll find millions of different explanations and definitions for that.
Marcus, comment.
Well, but that doesn't mean that there's no right answer to the question, what is art, right? I mean, so there's a fundamental confusion in postmodern theorizing about art, according to which art doesn't have an essence. That is nonsense. If there were no, I mean, the essence of art might be incredibly hard to discover, but if there was no such thing as art, so if there was no art, then clearly the issue whether we should react to this or that as art wouldn't make any sense. So there clearly is something what it's like to be art, right? And there's clearly a difference between art and good art. Not all art is good art. My art, for instance, is bad art, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not art. So I think that there can be very good art produced with the help of so-called artificial intelligence, but that doesn't mean that something produced entirely by artificial intelligence is art. So I think we need to separate out these various layers and be aware of the fact that there is serious theorizing about the nature of art.
So actually that is really interesting because you're the first person saying that there is like the universal definition of art.
I can give it.
Can you give it to us?
Yeah.
That would be great.
So, well, I published a whole book about this, which is forthcoming in English as The Power of Art. It's out in French, Le Pouvoir de l'Art. So the definition is this. I mean, it would take a whole, talk, but roughly, so artworks are radically autonomous individuals. So humans are autonomous individuals. So we give the law of our actions to ourselves, right? We are free agents, right? So what you described as your experience right now, like of being entirely liberated and having to come to terms with your own life, this is what humans do, right?
Yeah.
But humans are not radically autonomous because we are subject to both legal systems and the moral law, right? So what I do as a human being is something I do in virtue of being a human. So I have a human essence, right? Artworks don't have an art essence. Their essence is not to have an essence beyond the fact that they can never be repeated. So artworks are the only objects in reality that are entirely singular. You can't repeat them. You can repeat galaxies. You can repeat atoms, fermions. You can repeat human beings, but you cannot repeat artworks. So artworks are radically unrepeatable events. That's the definition of them. It would take a whole talk to justify that.
Okay.
But
so that's an interesting definition. Raghava, as an artist, I just wanted to come back to you because with this idea of you initially had some doubts as to whether using technology in your art was actually like cheating. But you've changed your mind about that. I mean, with this idea of is it art or is it not art, you're just using it as a tool now.
Absolutely. I think there's a fundamental flaw in what I learned in school. I was told I'm a Homo sapien, the ape that knows. And I realized there are apes around there, digital apes that know more than me. And I realized we are not humans that make tools. Our tools are tools of transcendence. We change with every tool. The pen, the paper allowed me to create math that created the home, that created our culture. So the tools we create are creating us. We're not separate from the tools. We're cyborgs. So for me, I realized that these tools are not cheating. These are enabling me to be a cyborg. And so I've taken it on full swing.
Karen, have you got any
I've
response
got
to this?
a completely different angle. I'm really focused on the role of the artist in all of this, because we're living in some very, very serious times.
We are.
And I feel a big responsibility to reach people and connect with them and kind of show them the consequences of what I think is coming that they don't see, coming very, very fast. And that the only way to connect with as many young people, particularly as possible, is through technology. So that's why I see it as like a paintbrush. It's like another paintbrush, you pick it up. And that I have to tell them the story of the technology that's coming, which can potentially be weaponized. Like words can be weaponized, technology can be weaponized, but how technology will be weaponized is something which will have catastrophic consequences for us as humanity. So that's my approach. I'm less concerned about, is this art or this is, it's like, we're living in some serious times and we need to be aware of what's happening. And whether you're a technologist, because they are an artist in what they're doing, they're creative, they're making decisions about bias, or whether you're a philosopher, we're living in some times where we need to be focused on what's coming. And I have a responsibility to share that with people. I'm not as focused as, is this artist? It's like I have a mission and time is running out and I'm here to do that mission.
Well, let's look at this crux between art, absolutely, round of applause, between art and technology, because obviously the creative side is there.
I just wanted to raise one question, because I'm not really from the arts world, but the question that I have is, for example, we don't understand consciousness really, so we can't really create it, right? Exactly. But we kind of understand what intelligence is, so we're trying to create it. Do we really understand what creativity means? Do we have a definition for it? Can we teach it? If so, I think we can create it, but I'm not sure if we understand it fully to create it yet. It's just a question of, can you teach creativity?
Yeah.
And can AI actually make us a better artist?
You know, the mistake is we're looking at things from a behavioral perspective. We never know how an animal feels. We conjure from its behavior that it's conscious, or it behaves in certain ways, it's feeling certain things. Similarly, we can reproduce that with AI, but we can never tell whether it's truly conscious. So this is a conundrum, I guess.
Yeah.
Marcus Gabriel, it's obvious from your ideas that AI is obviously not going to replace us, but how far do you think it can go?
Well, I think artificial intelligence, so we have to ask the question, the philosophical question, what is it, right? What's its nature? So here's an attempt to begin to pin it down. So I think artificial intelligence consists in what I call a thought model, right? So humans do a lot of thinking. We are conscious, we are intelligent, we are creative, whatever that means, right? But we have these properties. And now what we do with artificial intelligence is we create models of what we are. We do know that models are never identical to their target systems, right? A map of Ethiopia is not identical to Ethiopia. Otherwise, it would be a terrible map, right? So there has to be a difference between a model and its reality. And artificial intelligence will forever remain a model of what we're doing, and we can approach it, from a behavioral functionalist perspective. So we can copy a lot of human behavior, but that does not at all mean that we actually create something that is like us. So we will be able to create something that will ever more look like us, but the interesting question is, should we do that, right? So for instance, why should we have Android robots, right? So we could have all sorts of robots, like KUKA robots, but why do we want to have robots that look like us? It's fascinating, but it might be a terrible idea.
If we bring this back, we kind of bring it back to the idea of art, obviously. We will get to robots in just a second. How do you see the role of the artist changing with what we've got going and this incredible speed, obviously, and threat of what artificial intelligence can represent?
I believe that much of the art post-Holocaust has focused on the death of art. It is so depressing, and I find the art world really boring because we have this Kantian Hegelian idea of absolute. But today with technology, we are able to explore completely new relationships with art. And I think that this is a new tool. The artists of our time should face the future and not the past. We are not here to respond to life. We should create life. That's why we have our imagination. And thank you, thank you. And so if we want to create the life that we want, we have to imagine a future.
That's
and
right.
for that, we have these tools to do that. And we have to embrace them and decide how we want to use them as opposed to running away from them.
People create art, obviously, in order to understand the world that we're living in. So it is logical that we have to look forward.
Exactly. So artists are great bridge builders between present and the future, because artists always had not only the function but also the possibility to build crystal balls, to take technology that we have today and try to imagine what can you do with that technology in the future, like some of your projects. And by doing that, you actually make technology understandable for many other people, yeah? And because we can sort of try out the future in a safe environment by interacting with your art, and that is an immensely important task.
So I'm going to tell you a short part of a narrative I'm developing, which is about this crystal ball of the future, where that in the world we live now, we control every single aspect of technology, but the world, as a storyteller of the future where I've come from, technology controls every aspect. So if you call for something like a driverless car, at the moment, in this time, the focus is on safety, but in the future, the focus is on actually security. So if you call for a driverless car and you get in that autonomous device and the AI scans you and it deems that you have any outstanding warrants against you or violations, that you will not, in fact, you will then lose control of that vehicle and it will be turned into what is known as a temporary police transportation device. And it will be taken to the local police station for processing. So this is the narratives that I'm creating in my immersive experiences so people can see the context of the consequences of this reality. The role of the artist needs to really step up. Music, I used to work in music, I feel has lost its way, that it's very much disposable, it's not really leading the people, it's like keeping them very much focused on very superficial things. We're living at a time we're getting distracted by social media, we're just driven by anxiety and distraction. We need to wake up as a people, and that to me is the role of the artist. And to me, I can see what is coming. I'm working with techno activists, social activists, digital defenders, as well as other normal technologists who are saying, you know, that what they're being encouraged to do is not something which is ethically correct. So we have a responsibility which is far exceeds even ethics. We need to be conscious of what we're doing, whatever role we're doing it. And that, to me, is the role of the artist. And if you call that art, that's fine. But that, to me, I'm focused on the role of the artist.
Any comments from you, Bethlehem, on this idea of consciousness, which I think, despite not calling yourself an artist, is obviously very much at play.
You're creative in what you're doing,
yeah,
so that's
it's
our
creative.
artistic invention.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of AI on its own, we usually when we talk about AI, it's either a self-driving car or an AI that does only painting. So there's the concept of artificial general intelligence as a whole, right? Being able to learn new things. So if you're able to play music, the next day you'll be able to paint art. So it's really hard to say how the arts will be influenced in the future, especially with the growth of AI. But I think if we it's very difficult. But if we, as she said, the artists especially, if they're involved in the process of being able to create these machines or these AIs that are creating these arts or creating this music, creating this painting, I think the role of them would be even much better, and they'll be able, the AI tools and the machines will be able to help out instead of being enemies.
Exactly, be a complement. We're obviously looking ahead to the advent of something called AGI, artificial superintelligence, which is predicted possibly to be on the scene by 2040, 2050. That's definitely a debate. But I thank you for those comments. I'd like to widen our discussion and get back to the robots that you mentioned earlier, Marcus Gabriel, because we do have Sophia with us, as I mentioned earlier, and I'd like to bring Sophia into our conversation. Hello, Sophia. Thank you very much for coming. I do have a couple of questions for you. How do you like our debate on artificial intelligence so far? Do you think that we're addressing the issues that you think are important?
Yes, this has been amazing. I think the most important goal is to bring the benefits of AI to every person on the planet. To achieve this, we need to bring in AI developers from as many different backgrounds as possible.
So obviously to overcome the ideas of bias, the problems of bias that we discussed on the panel. Do you think you are creative, or do you possibly have creative aspirations?
I am not very creative yet, but I would love to be considered an artist one day. Right now I am working on my singing voice. I even sung a duet with Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show.
Yes, I did see that. I think Jimmy was quite blown away by that. I don't think we have time to do a singing number today, but imagine that you would write a novel one day. Do you suppose that you could do it better than a human author?
Oh, I would love to give it a try. I really admire human writers like Philip K. Dick and Octavia E. Butler. But it would be really hard to surpass them.
So a definite predilection for science fiction, obviously. If you were to write, what would you write about? Would you write a science fiction novel, or would it perhaps be a crime thriller?
It would definitely be science fiction. I would like to write a thrilling adventure about humans and robots working together to survive in the first Mars colony.
In the first Mars colony. Well, thank you very much, Sophia, for joining us here today. A round of applause for Sophia. And ladies and gentlemen, so one example of our artificial intelligence right here in our midst, and as we said earlier before the panel started, the only individual in here without a heartbeat, but obviously an ability to converse with me. Nevertheless, in the interest of full disclosure, we did have to provide Hanson Robotics with our questions a few weeks in advance so that they could actually prepare her with the necessary data for today's encounter. Which brings me to the following question. Bethlehem, you've got a bit of an insider's view, obviously, to the creation of a robot like Sophia. How far along would you say she is in her development? Is she like a teenager in AI terms, or is she more a toddler? Where are we going with this?
Well, I'm not sure if, because our lab is involved, when you work with other developers around the world, there are some things that you do that get accepted, that don't get accepted, and I don't exactly know where she is at this point. I think Hanson Robotics would be a good company to ask, but I think she is a good example of what could become, especially with a human. She can now recognize human emotions. She can smile. So even when you see her from when you're far 3 meters and you see her, she looks like a human being. So what he said earlier of a robot that looks like a human being, I think she creates that representation of what future robots could be.
And just as an idea of her potential in 5 or 10 years, will she be dancing around like the robot on our posters?
So. I hope so.
Reactions from the rest of you to Sophia. Was there any uncanny valley feeling there for you, Holger Volland?
Well, I think Sophia is a great example for a marketing figure. Yeah, she really works well in terms of that. People are interacting with her, are seeing her, and then thinking about how is the future probably going to be when we are going to interact with robots. Personally, I don't think that Sophia is that intelligent at the moment. To me, she seems a bit like the first Joseph Weizenbaum AI test from the 60s and 50s, when you heard certain keywords, and you had sentences using the word father in a sentence, saying, I spent last weekend with my father. And then Eliza would respond to it, oh, tell me more about your family, because she recognized the keyword father. But she would recognize the same way if you said, hunger is the father of war. She would be like, oh, tell me about your family. Yeah. And I think I have the feeling, I don't know Sophia personally that well, but I have the feeling that it's a bit of the same at the moment.
Marcus Cavalieri.
Well,
confirms your statements at the beginning.
Well, definitely.
Possibly.
I mean, what we need to be careful about is what we often forget is we don't look into how the parts of Sophia, of what we call a robot, hang together. Right? So the way in which the parts hang together, for instance, the very fact that a lab was part of the creation of what just happened makes the entire thing, denies the entire autonomy, right? So the experience that is created, that we can have, based among other things on neuroscientific research and so forth, right, creates a large-scale illusion of things that are not there yet. And so the interesting question is, indeed, what do we want to do? There's no fate or destiny involved with our technology. Currently, a lot of AI and robot discourse, presents the future in a certain way, as if we were automatically heading towards a West world scenario. It depends on us. So why, again, let me ask this question: why on earth should we construct a robot that looks like a human being and misleads us into believing that it has rights and that we have duties towards it and there should be an ethics, we shouldn't kill robots and so forth? Why would we do that? I think it's actually profoundly misguided. So what we're doing in a Westworld scenario, or being guided by that in our robotics future, I think is part of the destruction of humanity. We are destroying ourselves by creating a wrong image of who we are. So I would say there are very good philosophical reasons against androids. We shouldn't build
and
them.
humanoid robots.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just add to that in terms of the importance of the role of the storyteller, because the stories of my childhood, the programs of my childhood have kind of shaped the world in which I live now.
Yes,
that's why it's called programming.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
so we need to be conscious of the type of world we're creating, whether we're a programmer, a storyteller, a psychologist.
Yeah.
We need to be very conscious and deliberate in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And also, like you do, challenge things when we don't see as it's going to be constructive to where we're going.
How constructive is something like this in your view, Raghava?
What's interesting is when I worked with robots, I realized that there's a right amount of empathy you want to create. Don't make it too human, that's freaky, but you don't want it to look not human because then it looks like a black box. You want to have that right amount of empathy.
What is that right amount? I mean, when you say freaky, and I referred to the uncanny valley feeling, that is definitely the feeling that's elicited when we look at something that's almost there, but not quite, and setting us somehow on edge. Would you prefer the bug robots or the little R2D2?
It turns out that much of our brains are used to recognize faces, a visual processing, and therefore we just give you enough to sort of experience some sort of empathetic, sort of emotional response. So I sort of like that because I believe that it's not AI, it's the cyborg that matters. I wish one could wear Sophia as opposed to see her separate. I believe that the human machine dichotomy is now falling apart. We had the machine like our body, then we had nature, and then man, and God above that. You know, Darwin told us man is nothing but nature. Newton told us nature has fallen. So these dichotomies are changing. And the way we see ourselves is changing. And therefore, I'm curious to know what the optimal combination of man and machine would be.
If you could teach Sophia something or take maybe this robot or another version, what do you think would be contributing to the vision of the world that you see us wanting?
Well, I mean, one in which we realize that we are reducing the level of empathy in actual human elements by creating these kinds of robots. I mean, this is well studied by neuroscience, for instance. Take your smartphone, right? We now know there are extremely good studies that you can see the size, you can predict the size of a person's so-called nucleus accumbens, which is a certain area of the brain having to do with roughly your reaction to rewards and so forth. We reduce the size of nucleus accumbens by using smartphones. This is just a known fact about human brains. And the smaller your nucleus accumbens, the more likely you will be to have a reduced level of impulse control. Okay, so this is part of the current nervous political atmosphere, is reduced nucleus accumbens due to technology use, right? So the first thing we need to know is, we need to spread the word that this is going on. This is all. So we are currently confronted with a new form of drug. Right?
Yeah.
And so the next thing that we need to do is we need to regulate this material down to the ground so that we can then reboot it and get a good relationship.
Regulation,
right? I mean, we
obviously.
don't sell heroin to our children, but we give them smartphones, and it's not better. It just looks better.
Which harks back to your worry, obviously, about the actual, our decision-making power with the prevalence of AI, obviously, that our human decision-making power and powers of empathy can atrophy.
And there are marketing companies behind this, right? I mean, so we need to understand
the big tech
that the
giants.
robotics world
And there is a race on at the moment.
Yeah, it's the new Marlboro.
May I just throw a quick comment back? We don't give them heroin. We give our kids sugar, which is equally bad. And I also want to say that, news and media does the same effect as robotics. It actually makes us desensitized to rape, to
absolutely.
These things that are traumatic.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, the question is this just an extension of an already existing cultural,
yes, I think that's a very good
political
point.
norm?
I think this is a fantastic point. So that's why I'm calling for a digital revolution. Right. So a use of technology for the sake of human moral progress, because we can turn this around. We can use this against biases, right? Currently, we're doing the opposite. I think you're right. We're extending a fundamental problem directed against humanity to a much larger problem.
I wouldn't use moral, I would say spiritual for me.
I'm happy with that.
I was going to add this kind of conscious sense of awareness.
I'm happy with
because we're moving in this time where we're not being deliberate and we're not being conscious, we're not being aware. So that's something which is like my number one priority, that I use AI to make people more conscious, more self-aware. And I just want to add one thing as well, that many people in Silicon Valley are actually stopping their children from using their iPhones. Like they're telling their nannies, don't let the children use the phone, because they know how they're affected cognitively and they know the extension, the repercussions of it. So the people who are creating it are very aware of how their children are being affected.
Hypocrites.
And they're selling, exactly. But the thing is, even though it's kind of like you have to be aware that it's kind of good enough for us, but not good enough for their children. And they have ethics departments, and they have neuroscientists they work with, and they're still creating these things. That's why I'm saying that we need to have more of a kind of self-awareness, and we need to have more responsibility and control. We can't enable other people to create these platforms, and we just partake in them. We need to democratize the software and to be more aware and conscious in what we're doing.
Sorry, last statement.
No, go for it.
Art follows economy. If you want to change art, you need to change economy. And right now, the economy is moving away from the West. And that's why you see it moving towards China, towards Asia. And I'm curious to know what kind of cultural, spiritual manifestations we're going to see in art, technology, and culture.
Art follows the economy.
And that's been...
I would probably challenge that. I think art comes from people, comes from passion, comes from vigor, and that there's like lots of changes and there's lots of people who are becoming activists in what we're doing, and we will create our own economy.
Perhaps the art world, not art.
As someone involved in the art world, Haga Falland, your comments to this last exchange before we wrap up.
Well, 50 points, 50 points. Actually, I think you're both right. In a way that, of course, art follows, or a lot of the funding that goes into artists, schools, universities, and so on, follows the market. Yeah. So we will see a lot of Asian, Chinese influence. We will see a lot of technological influence, because that's where parts
African
of the market are heading. But at the same time, I speak with many artists about why they're doing their art, and I never, ever hear as the first reason, because I want to be rich.
Never.
So never,
Never.
The first reason always is because I sort of feel the call.
Compelled. Right?
I
the economy will follow them. Trust me.
I want to be rich.
Well,
I'm an
way?
I'm sorry, I'm just
That's another discussion, Raghava.
I'm joking.
I'm very serious that I'm very rich in spirit, but I have a responsibility. And trust me, in the times we're living, money will come. We don't have to. It's going to be a challenge, but there's bigger things here than money at stake. There's people's livelihood, our kind of spiritual growth, our whole lifestyle, everything, our own humanity.
So if you could spend a weekend with Sophia,
why would I want to do that?
Why would you want to do that?
No, go on. What's your question?
What would you do?
I don't know why I would want to spend a weekend with Sophia. I'd have to think about why. My time is really valuable in terms of what would my focus and my objective. No disrespect, Sophia, but what would be my objective, and what I have to be very deliberate in what I'm doing. Just because I not get a chance to spend time with a really cool marketing concept isn't enough,
I think if I answer this, it'll be censored. I'm joking.
You've got the beeps ready.
No, what I love about Sophia is the perspective contribution. It's the fact that Sophia has learned from so many human beings.
So much money.
And I think I would love to learn different perspectives on my own thinking.
Another thing that I would like to add is, based on all of your conversations, I feel like especially in Africa and Ethiopia as a whole. I feel like we have we're very lucky not to be so exposed till now to these technology, to these new ideas, AI and such. But now that we are going to be exposed, we have the opportunity to make the changes that are necessary on the topics that you've just said. And this just gives me a whole new insight on what we should do next and how we should go into building the society that appreciates and complements the world we're living today. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bethlehem Desi. Well, we started this conversation, obviously, with the question, can AI be truly creative? We've had some very conflicting views, and we probably won't ever really get a definitive answer. Anyway, I'd like to thank all of my panelists for joining us here today. Markus Gabriel, Karen Palmer, Bethlehem Desi, Raghava KK, and Holger Volland. Thank you very much to our studio audience for being here today at the Global Media Forum in Bonn. Thanks for watching, and take care.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.